Well, people are slowly coming in, which is good. And it is where I am. It is about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and in Greece it should be even an hour later. And whatever time it is around the world, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to WALA's 4th webinar in 2020. Thank you all very much for joining us today from around the world in a true WALA style. The world is our living room, and we can have a look into your living room now with this new and modern technology. If you can hear and see us, then you're much advanced versus your moderator, because as you can see, I was not able to get the virtual background that I wanted. It was either that or myself. And I was told that we opted to have me on the screen. As you can see, there's the Worldwide Airport Lawyers Association's logo in the background of all of my fellow speakers today. As you know, normally we would be in the final stage of planning our annual conference to meet face-to-face, as we have done a dozen times already. But what is normal today, or should I ask, what is the new normal? For us at WALA, a pandemic could not stop us to stay in touch with all of you. Therefore, we have established these webinars for our exchange. And let me take this opportunity to thank all of those who have made these webinars possible, namely our good friend Gustavo and his team, as well as my fellow board members, Diego, who's on the call, Elizabeth, who's also on the call, and Alan, all of whom have hosted and will host other webinars such as this one. I was going to start to show a video that Diego put together, but for sake of time, we skipped that. Diego is here and can say hello and wave to all of us. There he is, and it's a warm welcome to you and from you as well, Diego. Without further ado, let us start with the session today, as we want to stay on time and keep this to the time format that we have chosen because it seemed to work. The session today will be moderated in substance by one of the great minds of our industry and longtime friend of WALA. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you and welcome Professor Triant Flores. Triant, welcome. Triant is the Executive Director of the Center of Excellence in Logistics, Shipping and Transportation at the American College of Greece, ACG. He is, as you well know, an internationally recognized scholar with a 20-year-plus career in major universities in the US and Canada prior to coming to Greece. Dr. Flores has published over 300 academic articles on diverse topics such as risk management, strategy, international aviation, and very dear to my heart, project management applied to aviation. He has published numerous books and has refereed journal articles and reports. Triant's work and career illustrate a firm belief and commitment in the interplay between the link of theory and applied practice in aviation, using a collaborative approach and international focus. Triant will introduce his wonderful panelists as well as today's topic and lead through the discussion. Please use the chat function if you want to ask questions, and kindly mute your audio so that the respective speaker will have the floor to herself or himself. We shall attempt to answer your questions as we move along, and should we, due to lack of time, not come to that, we will try to do so later on in writing. Please make this a lively and worthwhile webinar, and thank you again for joining us. Over to you, Triant.
Michael, thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to see you again after all these years, since the time that we hosted WALA here in Athens. And it's a great pleasure for me to moderate this very interesting and very timely conversation in regards to liability in the time of COVID-19 and public health issues. Even though I'm not a lawyer, I believe that the work that lawyers do, especially aviation and airport lawyers, is incredibly important as far as the present and the future of our industry. Let me give you a context in regards to this discussion. Then I will introduce you the speakers, our true experts, those that will provide the substantive aspects of today's conversation. What I really would like to say first, or there are actually three things I would like to mention. The first thing has to do with the air transportation ecosystem. This is something we all know, but I would like to highlight that this ecosystem is characterized by the tight interplay between people and systems and very strict processes, protocols, and regulations in general, and more specifically in terms of safety and security. My admonition in terms of focus right now, as we're dealing with the crisis, is for us to look at and explore what is considered to be the 3 R's in management theory: responsiveness, resilience, and restoration. I believe that looking at that in the context of an organization, looking at the 3 R's in the context of the system is incredibly important, especially right now as we're facing a crisis. And I believe that those will be very important in helping us navigate and find solutions, long-term solutions in regards to similar crises in the future. The second contextual thing I would like to mention is that air transportation is amongst the most disrupted industries from the coronavirus pandemic. I actually saw a report and press release that IATA published last week, which is really incredible as far as the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic on the system in terms of numbers. We're talking about, in some cases, minus 91, 92% as far as RPKs, revenue passenger kilometers, as compared to last year. But most importantly, recovery is projected now to be closer to 2024 rather than before, attributed to a couple of different things. And recovery in terms of, in 2024, IATA projects we will be where we were in 2019 as far as numbers are concerned. Business demand right now is weak, and uncertainty seems to basically exacerbate this and shows or causes potential weakness in the near future. As far as consumer behavior is concerned, right now, what we see again is uncertainty as far as the future is concerned. So RPKs and planements should be where they were in 2019, in 2024, according to the IATA report. The third thing, so my point is that this crisis is going to be with us for a while in regards to its effects. The third thing is what could have been done and what can be done to mitigate and thereby manage the pandemic created by COVID-19. I think we should be focusing on 6 different things. And today, through this conversation, through the presentations that we will see that there is going to be a lot of discussion in regards to some of these 6 things. Public policy is important. Private-public partnerships are incredibly important. New product and system development is and will be important. Operational configurations, disease spread, and capacity planning will be the things that our industry should be looking at. So today, we will discuss through the expert input from our 2 speakers, the short and long-term impact of COVID-19 on the industry regulatory reaction towards restoring confidence in air travel, operational, financial, and legal aspects of that, consumer rights vis-a-vis COVID-19 contamination, what's the potential liability for airports and airlines, and the way forward in regards to the public, the airports, airlines, and the global economy, or the economy as a whole. Our 2 speakers come from Athens International Airport. an organization, an airport very close to my heart, an organization that has been incredibly supportive of academic endeavors, and especially has embraced here in Greece very warmly our plights to educate in the best possible way the next generation of aviation professionals. So I consider both Anna as well as Stamatis friends and people that have acted in a very collaborative manner in regards to linking academic endeavors and practice, which I think one informs the other. Starting with Anna, she oversees industrial affairs at Athens International Airport. In that capacity, she works towards AIA's interests, representation of the global EU and national arena, and to shape conditions that advance businesses and drive growth. For 8 years prior to joining Athens International Airport, she worked as policy advisor for the Hellenic Federation of Enterprises, which is a major business network and recognized social partner in Greece, member of Business Europe, the leading business advocate at the European level. I'm especially happy to say that Anna holds, she holds 2 master's degrees and a bachelor's degree, but one of the 2 master's degrees is from the institution that I'm actually sitting in right now at my university. So Anna has an MBA from the Alba Graduate Business School at the American College of Greece. She has a Master of Science in Media and Psychology from Pantheon University, also here in Athens, and a bachelor's degree in Communication and Mass Media from the University of Athens. She's a certified graduate of the Employers Young Professionals Academy at the ILO. Stamatis, who I have described before as the most academic, non-academic that I know, is a lawyer, is part of the legal team, senior legal advisor at Athens International Airport, having studied law at the University of Athens. And he as well holds 2 master's degrees, one from the University of Southampton and the second one from Leiden University, the Leiden University one in advanced studies in aerospace law. He's an author of a book on airport competition regulation, published in 2016, and he is a frequent participant in several ACI task force groups, a member of the ALA as well as WALA. So without any further ado, I would like to leave the floor or give the floor to our 2 presenters.
Well, hello, fellow airlaw enthusiasts. I'm deeply honored for the opportunity to share today with you some industry insights related to the COVID pandemic, and deeply honored to have you here on this late summer day. Physically it's August, but emotionally I'm still processing March. What about you? It's been a rough year. Well, I will start now sharing my screen. Give me one moment. Well, you see the pandemic in ancient Greece, in Athens here, a painting inspired by this pandemic. So pandemics is not something new. Throughout history, as humans spread across the globe, pandemics have been a constant companion. The Spanish flu in the beginning of the 20th century was the most recent pandemic. Excuse me, I cannot really move my slides. Sorry for this interruption. Well, here's the history of pandemics. So, the Spanish flu, here you can see it in green, in the beginning of the 20th century was one of the most severe pandemics. Back then, civil aviation was non-existent. Thus, there are no lessons to be learned, no impact to be discussed. COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by WHO back in March, and what makes really hard to calculate and forecast the impact is the fact that it's new to medicine and data is still coming. What's more, the containment measures to decelerate the spread of the pandemic have brought large parts of the economy to a standstill. Countries across the globe are adopting economic support measures designed to cushion the adverse effects on people and economic activity as much as possible. Aviation, for the first time in its history, has experienced a total lockdown, bringing air traffic to a standstill. As the situation unfolds, what renders most worrisome is the reluctance of people to travel, mainly because they are afraid, because of fear, for a virus whose behavior is still uncharted. According to the latest IATA passenger survey, 84% of the respondents would travel only if the virus was contained. Noteworthy that the same percentage was 74% back in February. As the global economy is entering into a recession, the US economy announced last week that its GDP was minus 10% already since the beginning of 2020, by the way. Aviation will have to deal with the projected by ACI minus 64% in air traffic and passenger numbers and 67% in revenue. IATA projects minus 50% more or less in revenues. To deal with this chaos, the European Union, while aiming to safeguard the survival and sustainability of air transport, having taken, of course, into account the significance of the sector, responded to these unprecedented conditions with unprecedented flexibility, agility, and rapidity. Its member state has adapted its regulatory framework according to the special conditions currently in place. On the health and safety field, there are several regulating acts that apply. Article 14 of the Chicago Convention, well known to all of you, requires contracting states to take effective measures to prevent the spread by means of air navigation of communicable diseases as the contracting states shall from time to time designate. WHO, the World Health Organization, developed the international health regulations which require states to designate key international airports to develop and strengthen surveillance, reporting, notification, verification, response, and collaboration. ICAO standards and recommended practices and supporting guidelines are aiming to ensure there is coordinated management of what the Chicago Convention and WHO impose. Annex 9 of the Chicago Convention specifies methods and procedures for airline operators when faced with a communicable disease. Chapter 8 of Annex 9 to Chicago Convention deals with facilitation provisions covering specific subjects. Included are the standards and recommended practices related to dealing with communicable diseases. Standard 8.12 establishes that contracting states shall comply with the pertinent provisions of the international health regulations of the World Health Organization. Standard 8.16 requires that the contracting state shall establish a national aviation plan in preparation for an outbreak of a communicable disease. Those standards establish obligations for the contracting states rather than the airlines. However, Standard 8.15 requires the pilot in command of the aircraft that he should ensure that a suspected communicable disease is reported promptly to the air traffic control in order to facilitate provision for the presence of any special medical personnel and equipment necessary for the management of public health risks. Annex 14 of the Chicago Convention addresses the information that must be provided by an airport with respect to facilities, airspace, lighting, and safety. Annex 15 ensures the flow of information necessary for the safety, regularity, and efficiency of international air navigation. In addition to the standards and recommended practices, ICAO has published guidelines for states. The guidelines include direction on airport closures and flight restrictions, both which should not be considered except in the most exceptional circumstances. Guidelines provide instruction on airline preparedness, noting that the prime responsibility for screening and managing travelers who may have a communicable disease is usually a public health responsibility. The airlines should establish general guidelines for passenger agents who may be faced with a suspected case of communicable disease relevant to airline operations at the airport, and cooperate with the airport, of course, and public authorities, public health authorities, on logistics such as dealing with a sick traveler, for example. In addition, the ICAO guidelines also address air carrier in-flight preparedness for illness. Finally, the ICAO guidelines recommend policies related to aircraft maintenance, cleaning, cargo and baggage handling, and that air carriers should establish methods to continue operating with greatly reduced staff numbers. EASA reacted promptly right after WHO declared the pandemic and issued a safety directive on operational measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus, referring to third country operators authorized by EASA pursuant to Commission Regulation 452 to perform commercial air transport of passengers into, within, or out of the territory subject to the provisions of the Treaty of the European Union. Later on, EASA issued an additional safety directive, effective 1st July, on operational measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus infection, referring to national aviation authorities responsible for the certification and oversight of aircraft operators. IATA and ACI coordinate with WHO and ICAO to ensure guidelines are adopted via operational recommendations. Up to now, and further to the COVID-19 outbreak, ICAO has published its global implementation roadmap, setting out the framework for ICAO to implement the recommendations and guidance outlined in the well-known and the so-called CART, the Council Aviation Recovery Task Force report, and the associated takeoff guidance. ACI is currently seeking explicit support from ICAO for a new airport health accreditation program it is launching to help airports in implementing the guidance from CART and to demonstrate to states and the public that airports meet the necessary requirements. Although the ICAO Council is in recess, the CART is expected to meet in mid-August to take stock of the developments. Not long ago, in 17 July, ACI Europe and EASA signed a cooperation agreement for the implementation of joint EASA-ECDC, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, COVID-19 Aviation Health Safety Protocol, which further consolidates its operational guidance to airports and airlines as the European standard and reference for states to follow. This agreement complements EASA's aviation industry charter for COVID-19, through which currently more than 30 airports report data back to the safety agency. You can see here the airports and also some discrepancies and difficulties that we have faced up to now. In terms of financial and broader measures targeting at the recovery of the European economy, the European bodies have, as mentioned before, acted very swiftly and flexibly. Back in March, the Commission published guidelines to ensure EU passenger rights are protected and applied in a coherent manner across the EU, in light of the mass cancellations and delays, of course. The Commission called on EU member states to support their cargo operations during the coronavirus crisis. The new guidance recommends operational and organizational steps to keep essential transport flows moving, including medical supplies and personnel. In April, the Commission published guidance on developing new applications that support the fight against coronavirus in relation to data protection. It aims to offer the framework to guarantee that citizens have sufficient protection of their personal data and limitation of intrusiveness while using such applications. This guidance is accompanying a relevant EU toolbox, which is available on the EU Commission's website. The Commission also approved 127 state aid measures to support business and protect livelihoods across Europe during the coronavirus outbreak. Airlines, until the 25th of June, had already secured a support package of approximately 26 billion euros. Other state and central bank support measures amount to approximately 7 billion. For airports, on the other hand, the only measure approved up to now is the concession fees deferral of payment for Walloon region, mainly for airports of Charleroi and Liège. This imbalanced approach has provoked reactions from ACI Europe, which is pushing towards a fair and transparent approach to the benefit of all players. In May 2020, the Commission, the European Parliament and Council adopted Regulation 696, amending Regulation 1008 on common rules for the operation of air services in the community in view of the COVID pandemic. The Commission will have to present summary reports on each of the matters covered by Regulation 696 to the European Parliament and Council by 15 November 2020. Where the criteria referred to in the Regulation 696 are fulfilled, the regulation provides that the Commission shall adopt as soon as possible delegated acts to amend it by extending the periods set out in the terms. The temporary measures include an amendment to the air carrier licensing rules, a simplification of the procedures applying to the imposition of traffic rights restrictions, more efficient award procedure for ground handling contracts, and authorization to prolong ground handling contracts until the 31st of December of 2021, with possible prolongation until 2022. This is all in order to avoid airports from becoming blocked should ground handling companies go bankrupt. In June, the Commission recommended to Schengen member states and Schengen associated states to prolong the temporary restriction on non-essential travel into the EU until 30 June. It also set out an approach to progressively lifting the restriction afterwards. Reopen EU is the new web platform that the Commission launched back on 15 June and is available to all European passengers that wish to travel and move within Europe. The platform provides real-time information on borders, available means of transport, travel restrictions, public health and safety measures, as well as other practical information. In July, EU leaders agree on the recovery plan and multi-annual financial framework for 2021 until 27, making a historic moment for Europe in the 21st of July. For aviation, the most pressing priority is now to get people off the ground. All aviation stakeholders have been working tirelessly towards this end in a coordinated and joint manner to ensure that the traveling public will be off the ground as much as in the recent past, as well as that passenger satisfaction will be at the core of safeguarding a solid and transparent regulatory framework is of utmost importance and is set to play a key role with regards to regaining the passengers' confidence in air travel. I may pass the floor now to Stamatis, who is going to elaborate on the more legal issues and claims and liabilities that could be provoked due to the pandemic. Thank you very much for now. Stamatis, please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Stamatis, kindly unmute your microphone because we cannot hear you. There's this little button down on the left-hand side of your screen. that shows the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay,
I go silent again.
okay. Thank you very much, Michael, for your kind words, and also Trian, thank you very much for your kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening from Athens. Great pleasure and privilege to be with you, talking about European Commission and talking about the state aid rules, to clarify, first of all, that the intention of the European Commission has been not to change the essence of the not to change the essence of the state aid rules, but rather to make an innovative kind of use of Article 107 of TFEU. As we all know, TFEU deals with two main sets of rules. One of these that is aid is compatible to EU in order to make good the damage caused by natural disaster or exceptional occurrences, and the other one under 3B to aid to promote the execution of any important project of common European interest or to remedy serious disturbance in the economy of the member state. 107.3b led to the creation of the temporary framework whereby I think more than 30 billion of euros have been so far provided as an aid to enterprises in Europe. Apart from that, and notwithstanding the very low participation to airports, those state aid schemes in your screen you may find the only state aid schemes already provided or to be provided. This is at least to our knowledge. Another innovative use of the state provisions made by the European Commission was that it accepts compensation for costs incurred by airlines and airports during the crisis under the concept of public remit or PSO. As to public remits, and specifically as to airports, such notion, usually and based on steady jurisprudence by the Union courts, extends only for reimbursement for costs directly falling within the ambit of public services, such as customs, police. However, and due to COVID-19 outbreak, it was accepted that such notion may be extended for the whole period of covering essential costs of airports that were obliged to operate contrary to any commercial rationale in order to accommodate sanitary repatriation or cargo flights. And as to airlines, it was accepted an analogous application of PSO concept even for international flights. So far, we have no any information as if one or more airports have applied to the European Commission. Just to add that any kind of such notification would not be regarded as state aid. States would be entitled directly to compensate for public remit services without notifying it to the European Commission. But this is a reaction of the European Commission towards, and I must say a rapid one, towards the outbreak of COVID-19. Apart from the Commission, its rapid reaction, we have also reaction from the passengers. We've got thousands of cancelled flights, and therefore comes also the issue of liabilities towards airlines and towards airport in case of a passenger has contracted COVID-19 either at an airport or during a flight. So moving to air carriers, first of all, liability. For countries that have ratified the Montreal and Warsaw system, all claims, we know that, are dealt in accordance with the respective provisions of the liability conventions. Otherwise, any kind of handling these cases in line with the national legislation or the conduct of carriage provisions. Pursuant to the liability conventions, we know Article 17 is identical for both the Warsaw System or the Montreal Convention. The carrier is liable for any damage sustained in case of a bodily injury or death of the passenger upon condition only that the accident which caused the injury or the death have taken place on board of the aircraft or in the course of operations of embarking or disembarking. Therefore, the main issues for a passenger to prove is that, first of all, the communicable disease contracted during air carriage, and second, that the transmission of this disease is an accident. As such term has been qualified by courts, and I must say by the very extensive jurisdiction that has been developed worldwide, namely, in a few words, that it is an unexpected and unusual event, that it is external to the passenger and not resulting from the passenger's own internal reaction to the usual, normal, or expected operation of the aircraft. We know that under the Montreal Convention, there is a two-tier liability concept. One is up to 128, as it stands today, 1,000 SDRs, and there's no any negligent test there. Once it is an accident, the airline should pay up to this limitation unless it can make use of defense of Article 20 that the damage was caused or contributed by the claimant. To this end, we know that it would be very difficult for a passenger in case of a contagious diseases like COVID-19, to establish a causation link. And since the passenger maybe have contracted the disease everywhere, let alone that the passenger may be asymptomatic for 2 or even more than 14 days. And also not to forget that under the Warsaw System, still applicable in many parts of the world, there's an overall total exoneration clause if the carrier can prove that he and his agents have taken all necessary measures to avoid the damage, or that it was impossible for him or them to take some measures. However, if evidenced, if the evidence succeeds in proving that he has contracted the COVID-19 during flight, yes, he's still entitled to this kind of compensation. But also we have to add not recovery for any mental injuries, because also as developed the case law in most jurisdictions of the world, results of mental compensation for mental injuries is permitted only to the degree that they are direct result of bodily injuries. For claims now, under also the Montreal condition exceeding the above limit, the carrier should evidence only defense that the damage was not due to its negligence or was due to the act or omission of a third party. To this end, a negligent test is applied based on reasonableness to air carrier, and airline liability will be mainly dependent based on whether the airline had knowledge or should have knowledge that a passenger or a crew member was a health risk, and whether the airlines, once it took notice of this kind of risk, took all required steps and measures in line with the established health protocols and related legislation, as Anna mentioned before. Of course, failure on behalf of the carrier to act in the face of a serious risk not only satisfies the meaning of accident, but also makes the carrier, as stated above, susceptible for claims exceeding the above limitations. WHO, ICAO, EASA, and national legislation set standards for the required response to pandemics. And to this effect, for example, and that's just for example, failure of an airline to deny boarding to a passenger or to a crew member that has demonstrated COVID-19 symptoms, or failure of an airline to accommodate a COVID-19 incident on board as per required measures, or to provide related information to address the problem to all authorities, failure to maintain properly the aircraft, or failure to have an adequate ventilation systems may trigger these kind of claims by the passenger. We talked a bit about airline defenses. We said the contributory negligence that may be invoked by the carrier as regards a claimant request. We talked about the claims exceeding the limitation of model convention, the defense of non-negligence, or the wrongful act of a third party. There is also an overall defense which needs to see whether it can be tested or not in the future, that COVID-19 is not an accident, since it is not an unusual or unexpected event, but it is a widespread disease, and perhaps recourse can be found. Carriers may find recourse to the deep main thrombosis case law, where DVD was not seen as an expected and unusual event, and therefore did not qualify as an accident. Moving now from air carrier liability to airport liability, here and unless an airport is not an agent to the carrier, for example, is not a handler to a carrier, then there's no any direct contract, but instead there is a duty of care, and airports should ensure safety and adherence to guidelines. Airports should follow the protocols issued by national legislation. Any claim, therefore, of passenger will be based on tort provisions and will require an act or omission by an airport operator, a bodily injury, in our case, illness to COVID-19, and of course, a causation link as a result of negligence or willful misconduct. This is not our case, of course, between the bodily injury and the act or omission of the airport. It is therefore very important that airports that assumes a role of rather of a facilitator and not of implementator of the measures, not to violate, but to ensure adherence to guidelines issued by WHO, EASA, and of course national legislation. Just some small examples: appointment of coordinator, flow of information, implementation of physical distancing, to minimize the touching surface, to have taken all adequate hygiene measures are essential, are very essential tasks for airport operators, because an airport would only be liable to passengers in any case of infection due to COVID-19 if it is the result of an accident that has happened on the airport and which was caused by the negligence, that means act or omission on the part of the airport. However, passenger claims are not confined only around the notion of accident as against airlines or airports. We know that the global collapse of aviation resulted to thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, of cancelled flights due to traffic prohibitions and restrictions. This brought many complaints by passengers claiming back to be reimbursed of the tickets already paid. European Union, we know that Regulation 261/2004 applies in case of flights originating from EU airports, or in case of flights that originating from non-EU airports to an EU airport and operated by a community carrier. Otherwise, in any other case, we have the Montreal Convention or the Warsaw System that applies to delays. Also, we know that if the journey, if the trip has been cancelled by the initiative of the passenger, then as to any kind of reimbursement or rebooking applies solely and exclusively the carrier's terms and conditions. Moving to compensation, we know that under the liability regimes, mainly often offer to passengers compensation, not for any kind of inconvenience, and as in the case of 261 of 2004, but in case of damages. The passenger should demonstrate damages in order to be compensated while the airlines may be free of any kind of liability if it can be proved that all reasonable measures had been taken in order to avoid this damage. Here, there's a big distinction between what is contemplated under Article 5 of Regulation 261/2004, which I must say is much more sophisticated. There's passengers, in order to not to be compensated by airlines, must be informed of the cancellation of at least 2 weeks before the time of departure, or the operating air carrier can prove that the cancellation goes by extraordinary circumstances which not have been avoided even if all reasonable measures had been taken. To this end, union courts and based on very extensive case law have developed a very three-party test. Allow me just a small parenthesis, just to say that the cancellation or delay must be attributable to an event that is not inherent to the normal exercise of the aircraft, that the so-called inherency test. The events must be outside the carrier's control, the control test, and the cancellation of delay should be caused by extraordinary circumstance, could not have been avoided even if all reasonable measures had been taken, the reasonable test. On March 18, 2020, the European Commission published its interpretative guidelines on EU passenger rights in the context of the developing situation with COVID-19. These guidelines, and as to compensation, clearly accept that any kind of cancellation of flight can be considered as extraordinary circumstance due to the fact that there were ban of flights and ban of movements of people. Also, if an airline decides to cancel the flight and so that this decision was justified on grounds of protecting the health of the crew, again, it should be viewed as a cancellation of flight due to extraordinary circumstances. As to reimbursement and rerouting, Article 8.1 provides options for the passenger. The first one is reimbursement in 7 days, while the other two is rerouting to the final destination at the earliest opportunity or rerouting to the final destination at the latest date at the passenger's convenience. As to reimbursement, and pursuant to the EU Commission guidelines, in cases where the passenger books outbound flight and return flight separately, but the outbound flight is cancelled, then the passenger is entitled only reimbursement for the cancelled flight, that is the outbound flight. If, however, both flights are part of the same booking, there's a return ticket. Even if operated by many carriers, more than one carrier, then it should be offered two options to the passenger, if in case that the outbound flight is cancelled. Either to be reimbursed for the whole ticket or to be rerouted or another flight for the outbound flight. The main problem, however, is with the rerouting at the earliest opportunity, because simply carriers may find or have found impossible to reroute passengers within a short time period or even to try to do that, even such rerouting would be possible, because it was not. Given the above, passenger should be informed about the delays and uncertainties. If passengers choose, however, to be rerouted on the earliest opportunity, then air carriers shall be deemed to have fulfilled their obligations if communicate in good time the flight available. Right of care, as per Article 9 of regulation, still exists, but of course it does not exist in case of reimbursement or in case of rerouting to the final destination of the passenger convenience. Given the circumstance that the circumstance that has been developed following the COVID-19 outbreak, there have been instances where carriers cancel their journey and offer only a voucher to passenger instead of a choice between reimbursement and rerouting. The Commission is very clear in its guidelines. If the carrier proposes only a voucher, this cannot affect the passenger right to opt reimbursement instead and irrespective if such offer is based on national legislation. On the other hand, following requests by many EU countries and of course pressure of IATA, European Commission came on May 13, 2020 with a proposal that actually tried to legitimate the practice of providing voucher, but only as a choice. So travelers who have the right to choose between vouchers and reimbursement for canceled transport tickets, and also it was airlines, air carriers were encouraged to make it attractive, this kind of practice by rendering vouchers to be protected as against insolvency, to have a minimum validity of 12 months, to be refundable after 1 year if not redeemed, to be flexible, to have, of course, the same travel conditions, and to be transferable to another traveler. Our opinion is that this kind of proposal is in line with the principle of proportionality, because the primary objective of the reimbursement rerouting is to provide passengers with an alternative, a viable alternative, which in our case could not be the case. Actually, carriers were left and passenger, we de facto lost one option, the option to be rerouted on the earliest opportunity. So if airlines were unable to provide any air service, any rerouting, and yet at the same moment were obliged to refund within 7 days the whole ticket, this would most likely have driven most carriers out of business. To this respect, we would think that this would be a breach also of the principle of proportionality that requires that implementation of EU measures is appropriate to attain the objective and must not go beyond what it is necessary to be achieved. This is what at least the EU case law holds. Vouchers are the reality, let's say, on this. It's a new reality on these unprecedented times, and it's a typical example on the way forward. I'll give now the floor to my dear colleague Anna on the way forward.
Okay, thank you, Stamatis. It's time to take the crystal ball and time to look into how we expect the future to be. Of course, it's something really challenging, and we're going to take our guesses and keep our fingers crossed for things to get unexpectedly better. Well, new realities are formed by the unprecedented demand as well as supply pressures currently being imposed by the travel restrictions existent across the globe in an uncoordinated manner, which makes things even worse. In the near future, and as the global economy is entering into a recession, the reduced disposable income of passengers, as well as the trending deglobalization and the so-called happy localism, will put additional pressure, of course. The upcoming months will be critical for all aviation stakeholders, as the structural changes are expected to occur in terms of business and operating models. IATA, representing airlines, has been in direct contact with governments across the globe asking for rescue packages for the industry. Governments, from their side, have responded with an open, supportive attitude, and many have announced significant measures, including the United States, governments in Asia, Pacific, and the Middle East. All these elements are aimed at getting cash on the balance sheet, as posed by IATA. If they can't get enough cash flowing, then the entire industry faces bankruptcy. Well, leisure travel is expected to recover faster. With long haul's recovery expected to be slower. Business travel is expected to be very much affected due to the digital solutions, Zoom is one of them, that have been increasingly leveraged by companies to organize virtual events, thus significantly reducing corporate costs. Nevertheless, Oliver Wyman's Traveler Sentiment Survey notes that over the next several years, business travel may be less impacted than leisure. 70 to 80% of those who fly for business expect to travel the same or more after the pandemic, according to the same survey, except China. 29 of the respondents who plan to travel less for business attribute their answer to health and safety concerns. This is something to note as well. Airports, on the other hand, are expected to be severely impacted as well, as the competition is expected to increase fiercely, no longer for growth though, but to restart and retain traffic. Additionally, airports' commercial revenues will be also kept under pressure since passengers will be less in volume, more reluctant to spend due to the fear of COVID contraction, as well as due to their restricted budget. What is also at risk is airport investment. I remember last April, if I'm not mistaken, I was traveling with a delegation of Athens International Airport to European airports, to European fellow airports, and to visit fellow colleagues and discuss about their expansion programs and benchmark our approach against theirs in order to see how we develop our future. This is not the case anymore. Infrastructure investments are, of course, very, very much challenged right now. And the back then rapidly increasing demand has been, let's say, severely impacted. And the net zero carbon commitments are still on, but there is a huge question mark regarding the way forward. On this stage. At this point, almost everything is questioned and challenged, and the lack of support to the airport, to the air transport ecosystem as a whole raises questions regarding the role of states in terms of interventionism and protectionism, as well as regarding the economic models of aviation stakeholders. The liberalization of airline ownership and control through the amendment of the Regulation 1008 towards enabling the Commission and national authorities to more easily address some of the consequences of the coronavirus crisis could prove to be more than a temporary solution. Let's see. Last but not least, the health and safety concerns are expected to feed into the climate and sustainability agenda, with potentially detrimental effects for air travel. Well, now to close this webinar, Stamatis and me thought that it would be relevant to share some recent thoughts of Yuval Noah Harari, one of the most prominent modern thinkers and author of the two bestsellers Homo Deus and Homo Sapiens. Back in March, Harari, in an article published by the Financial Times, referred to a collective paralysis that has gripped the international community. The global leaders have failed to come up with a common action plan. In this global crisis, the biggest of our generation, many short-term emergency measures are set to become a fixture of life and most probably shape the future world. According to Harari, as immature and even dangerous measures and technologies are pressed into service because the risk of doing nothing is bigger, humankind faces two important choices, the one that you have in front of you: totalitarian surveillance versus citizen empowerment, and nationalist isolation versus global solidarity. When people are given a choice between privacy and health, let's be honest, they will usually choose health. But to make people comply with beneficial guidelines, Harari favors a self-motivated and well-informed population over a policed and ignorant one. To achieve such a level of compliance and cooperation, trust in science, public authorities, and the media is necessary. A spirit of global cooperation and trust would enable global sharing of information, a necessary prerequisite to defeat the virus. Global cooperation is needed on the economic front too, where an action plan is of vital importance to safeguard the global supply chain. And with these thoughts, we think it's high time to conclude and pass the floor on to Triant for any questions that might have arisen. And allow me to sincerely thank my colleague Stamatis Varsamos for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna and Stamatis. We have gone a little bit over time, but I believe we should stay around. We should stick around for a couple of questions. And the reason we went over time, obviously, is because we had an excellent, comprehensive, and thorough presentation by our two presenters. There are a couple of questions that we have received, and quite a few that we received ahead of time. But let me just let me pose the, and I think this is primarily for Stamatis. Let me pose the first question, or we can do a couple. Let me just do this one that was just posted. Inside the airport, who is responsible for interrupting the passenger trip for COVID reasons? It's a critical point in terms of the judicial role of airport operator, national legislation, which must be clear in this sense. Stamati, I believe this is closer to.
Thank you. As stated before, we are not implementators of the measures for containment of COVID-19. So it might be the authorities or the carrier if the carrier suspects that a passenger exhibits COVID-19 symptoms. But certainly the airport cannot interrupt a passenger's trip. What an airport can do if it has any knowledge of a person, of a passenger that has exhibits COVID-19 symptoms, is to immediately inform the authorities. We have a very close cooperation with health authorities here at the airport. We are also planning to open a center for allowing people to have their test here at the airport before making their air travel. But we are not authority. We are operating an infrastructure and we don't have administrative powers either to stop a passenger, to detain a passenger, or even to arrest a passenger, let's say. This is what authorities are doing here at the airport, and we believe we have a very good cooperation. Also, and if I may, there have been some other questions I can see here about if it is mandatory to wear masks and to maintain social distance. Yes, wearing masks at the airport premises it is mandatory. Also, it is mandatory not to leave visitors unless there is a need for that. For example, they escort an elderly people or like that, not to enter into the terminal. So everybody, personnel and passengers and visitors, should wear masks while at the premises of the airport. If they do not, we must inform the authorities, because the authorities are only empowered to issue a fine. We cannot issue a fine. We cannot detain a passenger. We must just inform the authorities, and we must inform, and we keep doing that constantly, all passengers, all visitors at the airport on the hazards of COVID-19. And also we invite them, and we keep reminding to all people here at the premises of the airport that wearing masks is mandatory. Also, the case of distancing. Case of distancing, which also also stems from EASA health protocols is to the degree possible, and distancing may be as specific as per the circumstance may be different, but the social distancing of something between 1 and 2 meters is something that we are trying to keep it to the extent possible at the airport premises. And again, if we notify violation of guidelines, if we notify violation of national legislation, we shall inform immediately the authorities. We are the facilitators, we are not the implementators of the measures.
And I see, Stamati, to a large extent, you have answered the most recent questions.
Yeah.
Question that has been posed in regards to refusal. If you don't mind, let me just ask one last question from the ones that were posed to us prior to the beginning of the webinar. How did the airport react to the pandemic, and what was the role of the legal team? If both you and Anna can address this, I would greatly appreciate it.
Okay. Anna, you want to start with how airport reacted? I will go on with the legal team. Okay.
Yes, of course. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration is the answer. Collaboration with the ACI, of course. Collaboration with all airport community in order to provide the Greek government with the most up-to-date and informed input and advice, of course. Open dialogue and agility were the aspects that enabled us react and act swiftly, and enabled this piecemeal approach that we are still following. This is from my side.
From our side, and apart, of course, from very rapid digitalization of all forms of our business, so from now on, I think the most critical has been the realization that our business was very close to be interrupted due to COVID-19 and the closed skies. So I think, again, the word collaboration became very critical in our relations with all third parties operating at the airport, I think, in those times. And what it is necessary, apart from trying to apply some contractual clauses, is to establish trustworthy relationship with your partners. And I think this is what I've been trying to do, and as a company and as a legal team here at the airport. Of course, sometimes the exercise is not always very easy, but I'm happy to say, and we're very pleased to say that as a community, as airport community, we have tried to react in the most efficient manner, so as to everybody try to keep its businesses.
Thank you, Stamati. Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. We will wrap it up right now. There's a yes, Stamati.
Maybe there's one question. May I just still?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, go ahead.
There was a question about the wrongful act on Montreal Convention. I would just
yes.
I was just referring to defense of air carriers, and one of the defenses trying to avoid liability exceeding the 128,000 SDRs is also try to prove something will be, I think, not unusual in the case of COVID-19, that the accident has been due to the wrongful act of a third party, not the carrier of a third party. This is what I was referring to. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you again. Let's wrap it up right now. There was incredible interest and attendance. We had over 50 people that attended this webinar. I consider it successful. We will share some minutes in regards to the webinars, this one as well as the others that have been organized by WALA. I would like to thank Gustavo and the WALA team in regards to this idea, the structure, and the great way that these webinars contribute to knowledge. So thank you, Gustavo. Really, really appreciate that and your leadership. Michael, thank you for the sponsorship. Thank you for setting the context. Most importantly, Anna and Stamatis, thank you very much for you're amazing. As I said before, excellent, thorough, and comprehensive contribution to a topic which is incredibly important, very interesting, and evolving, most importantly. And let's see what happens in the future. I would like to see your crystal ball versus reality in the future. That was amazing. And of course, thank you, ladies and gentlemen around the world, for attending this webinar.